tenue par visioconférence est ouverte. L'ordre du jour provisoire de la présente séance est la situation au Moyen-Orient, y compris la question palestinienne. L'ordre du jour est adopté. Conformément à l'article 37 du règlement intérieur provisoire du Conseil, j'invite le représentant d'Israël à participer à la présente séance. Il en est ainsi décidé. Je propose que, conformément aux dispositions de son règlement intérieur provisoire et à la pratique établie en la matière, le Conseil invite le ministre des Affaires étrangères de l'État observateur de Palestine à participer à la présente séance. Puisqu'il n'y a pas d'objection, il en est ainsi décidé. Au nom du Conseil, je souhaite la bienvenue à son Excellence M. Riyad Al-Malki. Conformément à l'article 39 du règlement intérieur provisoire du Conseil, j'invite les intervenants suivants à participer à la présente séance. M. Nickolay Mladenov, coordonnateur spécial pour le processus de paix au Moyen-Orient et représentant personnel du secrétaire général, et son Excellence M. Ahmed Aboul Haït, secrétaire général de la Ligue des États arabes. Il en est ainsi décidé. Le Conseil de sécurité va maintenant aborder l'examen du point 2 de l'ordre du jour. J'attire l'attention des membres du Conseil sur le rapport du secrétaire général sur l'application de la résolution 2334 du Conseil de sécurité publiée sous la cote S 2020-555. Je souhaite chaleureusement la bienvenue au secrétaire général, aux ministres et aux autres représentants de haut niveau. Votre présence aujourd'hui témoigne de l'importance de la question à l'examen. Je donne maintenant la parole au secrétaire général, son Excellence M. António Guterres, pour qu'il fasse une déclaration liminaire.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Excellencies, I address you today with a deep sense of concern over the evolving situation in Israel and Palestine. We are at a watershed moment. Israel's threat to annex parts of the occupied West Bank has alarmed Palestinians, many Israelis, and the broader international community. If implemented, annexation would constitute the most serious violation of international law, grievously harm the prospect of a two-state solution, and undercut the possibilities of a renewal of negotiations. I call on the Israeli government to abandon its annexation plans. The Palestinian leadership has reacted by considering itself absolved of all bilateral agreements with Israel and the United States. Increased economic fragility as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, reduced donor support, and the recent Palestinian decision to stop accepting clearance revenues that Israel collects on behalf of the Palestinian Authority risk increasing the hardship of the Palestinian people. As I said in February, when I spoke before you and President Abbas in the Council, you have my full commitment to continue supporting Palestinians and Israelis to resolve the conflict and end the occupation in line with international law, relevant United Nations resolutions and bilateral agreements. The goal is achieving the vision of two states, Israel and an independent, democratic, contiguous, sovereign and viable Palestinian state, living side by side in peace and security within secure and recognized borders based on the pre-1967 borders, with Jerusalem as the capital of both states. I will continue to consistently speak out against any unilateral steps that would undermine peace and the chances for resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict through meaningful negotiations. Such actions also further hamper efforts to advance regional peace and to maintain international peace and security. I urge Israeli and Palestinian leaders to commit to meaningful dialogue with the support of the international community. I encourage regional and international supporters of the two-state solution to help bring the parties back to a path towards a negotiated, peaceful settlement. I call on fellow members of the Middle East Quartet to take up our mandate mediation role and find a mutually agreeable framework for the parties to re-engage without preconditions with us and other key states. Leaders must act wisely and swiftly and demonstrate the will to advance the goal of a just and lasting peace. Mr. President, allow me to ask you to now give the floor to the Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process and my envoy, Mr. Nickolay Mladenov, to brief the Council.
Je remercie le secrétaire général de sa déclaration. Le secrétaire général devra quitter la séance à 9h50 en raison d'autres obligations. Nous tenons à le remercier une nouvelle fois d'avoir participé à la séance d'aujourd'hui. Je donne à présent la parole à Monsieur Nickolay Mladenov.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Members of the Security Council, Secretary General Guterres, I'm devoting my regular briefing on the situation in the Middle East to the 14th report on the implementation of Security Council Resolution 2334. The written report you have already received, and it covers the period from the 21st of March to the 4th of June this year. Before turning to developments that have occurred since the written report, I would like to reiterate the Secretary General's grave concern over the continuing threat of Israeli annexation of parts of the occupied West Bank, a process officials have said could begin in weeks. Deliberations over this move have brought this long-standing conflict to a critical juncture. Annexation could irrevocably alter the nature of Israeli-Palestinian relations. It risks upending more than a quarter of a century of international efforts in support of a future viable Palestinian state living in peace, security, and mutual recognition with the State of Israel. The Secretary-General has just unequivocally stated that any move to annex occupied Palestinian territory would have serious implications in terms of international law, the two-state solution, and the prospects of a negotiated, sustainable peace. International and regional opposition has also been widespread. European leaders continue to voice their opposition to annexation and have also affirmed that it would amount to a violation of international law. Powerful statements rejecting such a move have been issued in the past weeks by His Majesty the King of Jordan, the Arab League, and leaders across the Arab world, including a strong message directly to the Israeli people from the United Arab Emirates. In addition to the official statements, we have witnessed opposition to the move from Israeli and Palestinian civil society, think tanks, academics, and many others. Multiple opinion polls have indicated that Israelis are deeply divided over the issue and do not consider it as a priority, as the country is in the grips of an economic crisis and rising unemployment. Thousands of Israelis have protested the move at gatherings in Tel Aviv's Rabin Square and other locations across the country. Mr. President, recognizing that both peoples have a right to live in their ancestral home, 27 years ago, Israeli and Palestinian leaders agreed to embark on a noble but difficult road to resolve the conflict through negotiations, without taking unilateral action and in order to reach a final status agreement on a just peace. Today, we are further than ever from this goal. As the prospect of a negotiated two-state solution is undercut, the specter of anger, radicalization, and violence emerges. Beyond the legal, security, and economic implications, the threat of unilaterally annexing parts of the West Bank will send one message and one message alone. Bilateral negotiations cannot achieve peace. We cannot allow this to happen. No good can come out of the breakdown of dialogue and communications. Diplomacy must be given a chance. All of us who believe in the legitimate right of both Palestinians and Israelis to self-determination, security, and a brighter future must reject this move and consolidate efforts to preserve a sustainable two-state solution. This is why I ask you today to join the Secretary General in his call for an immediate re-engagement with no preconditions between the Middle East Quartet, the United States, the Russian Federation, the European Union, and the United Nations, and the Palestinian leadership Israel, and the countries of the region. This is in order to find a way out of the current crisis. I believe that only by working together we can restore meaningful Israeli-Palestinian dialogue and improve stability and conditions for people on the ground. Such discussions have been dormant for too long, letting both sides slip further apart along diverging paths. Unilateral action has made the goal appear even more distant. Based on shared principles and aspirations, we can identify realistic steps to avoid increasing polarization and to advance the goal of two states living side by side in peace and security, integrated into the region. In the interests of peace, I urge the Israeli and Palestinian leadership to take this opportunity and to return to the path of engagement. Mr. President, in response to the threat of annexation, the Palestinian leadership declared itself absolved of all agreements and understandings with Israel and the United States. It has subsequently halted all bilateral contacts. This decision has had and will increasingly have a dramatic impact on all aspects of Palestinian life. Particularly worrisome is the decision to stop accepting the clearance revenues that Israel collects on behalf of the Palestinian Authority. Adding to the economic uncertainty caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, the Palestinian Authority has now lost 80% of its monthly revenue. This gap cannot be filled by donors. Palestinians in Gaza who have lived with closures and under the control of Hamas for more than a decade are particularly vulnerable. The ending of civilian coordination will not allow them to receive life-saving treatment. Already an 8-month-old infant has lost his life due to this situation. Surely there must be a red line when it comes to the lives of children. The United Nations and other international organizations are increasingly being asked to perform coordination responsibilities. While we are prepared to provide support on an emergency basis, the UN cannot replace the Palestinian Authority. It is critical that humanitarian and other assistance not be delayed or stopped. Mr. President, in the coming weeks, decisions may be reached that will do irreparable damage to Palestinian and Israeli societies, to the security and economic well-being of both peoples. This bleak vision, however, is not yet a fait accompli. The window is closing, but there is still time to avert chaos. It will require a concerted effort by all stakeholders and the will to take political risks to achieve peace. As a first step, I joined the Secretary General in calling on Israel to abandon its plans to annex parts of the occupied West Bank. Mr. President, allow me to turn briefly also to significant developments since the written report has been circulated. In terms of settlement-related activities, on the 9th of June, Israel's High Court of Justice struck down a controversial 2017 law that enabled wide-scale expropriation of private Palestinian land and the retroactive legalization under Israeli law of thousands of housing units in Israeli settlements. The court ruled that the law was unconstitutional due to its violation of Palestinian rights of property and equality. Meanwhile, one Palestinian was killed and 44 injured, including 6 children, during demonstrations, clashes, and other incidents across the occupied Palestinian territory. 5 were injured by live ammunition. 3 Israelis were injured with stones when stones were thrown at a bus traveling through the West Bank. A total of 45 structures were demolished on grounds of lack of permit in Area C in East Jerusalem, displacing some 28 people and otherwise affecting an additional 250. On June 23rd, a 20-year-old Palestinian man from Abu Dis was shot dead by the ISF in an apparent car ramming attack at a checkpoint, and an IDF soldier was also injured. Settler-related violence incidents during the reporting period were concentrated mainly in Hebron's H2 area and in the Nablus governorate. In Gaza, despite the relative calm, the launching of incendiary balloons and devices continued, with some 20 devices launched over the fence into Israel. On the 15th of June, a rocket was launched from Gaza towards Israel, landing in an open field and causing no damage. In retaliation, the Israeli Defense Forces targeted several Hamas targets in the Strip. Meanwhile, the Kerem Shalom crossing for goods into Gaza has continued to operate as normal. However, the Palestinian Civil Affairs Committee in Gaza has stopped receiving and processing permit applications for Gaza residents and ended all communication with Israeli authorities. As a result, hundreds of patients, including many children needing life-saving medical treatment, have not been able to exit the Strip. Mr. President, UNRWA's financial situation remains a serious concern to all of us. I thank Jordan and Sweden for their efforts to mobilize support for the agency, including yesterday's pledging conference, which they co-chaired with the participation of the Secretary General. I welcome the pledges that were announced, although they fall well short of the needs of UNRWA, and its funding gap remains extremely serious. I encourage Member States to support the agency to ensure its operations can continue throughout 2020. Mr. President, in closing, I would like to again highlight the immense risks we face over the coming weeks and months as we confront the very real possibility of annexation and its consequences. If implemented, these steps could dramatically alter local dynamics, triggering instability across the occupied Palestinian territory and maybe beyond. This conflict has been marked by periods of extreme violence, but never before has the risk of escalation been accompanied by a political horizon so distant, an economic situation so fragile, and a region so volatile. It is crucial for all stakeholders to take action that will enable the parties to step back from the brink. The goal must be to urgently re-engage in dialogue that will halt unilateral steps, chart a positive way forward, and avoid a descent into chaos. Everyone must do their part in the coming weeks to preserve and promote the prospect of ending the occupation and achieving a negotiated two-state solution based on international law, UN resolutions, and bilateral agreements. Thank you.
Je remercie M. Mladenov de son exposé. Je donne maintenant la parole à son Excellence M. Ahmed Aboul-Rait.
Thank you, Mr. President, Secretary General, distinguished members of the Security Council. I will be candid and straightforward in my talk today. It is the duty and responsibility of this Council to address any situation that threatens international peace and security. The Arab League firmly believes that the possible move by the Israeli government to annex parts of the occupied Palestinian territory would constitute, if implemented, a serious threat to regional stability with broader ramifications on the international security and the world. Since 1993, the Palestinians have wisely chosen the path of peace and coexistence. They signed interim agreements with Israel in the hope that this would pave the way for the establishment of an independent Palestinian state on the June 4, 1967 lines, with East Jerusalem as its capital. Yet, for 3 decades, real peace and the creation of an independent Palestinian state remained elusive. Israeli settlement activities expanded, and the logic of perpetual occupation and domination has entrenched. Negotiations stumbled, were suspended numerous times, and have led to nowhere. Despair is dominating the Palestinian mood and scene. Despite these setbacks, the two-state solution remains the only paradigm accepted by both parties and endorsed by the international community. The ambitious Arab Peace Initiative was launched back in 2002, adopting the same parameters as a means to achieve regional peace and normalization with Israel. If implemented, Israeli annexation plans would not only be detrimental to the chances of peace today, but will destroy any prospects for peace in the future. Palestinians will totally lose faith in a negotiated settlement, I'm afraid Arabs too will lose interest in regional peace. A new dark reality will set in vis-à-vis this conflict and in the region at large. Israelis wrongly believe that the status quo is sustainable. Actually, it is not. If the two-state solution is removed from the table, a one-state reality will take its place, and this is going to create a whole different reality and dynamics. What is also at stake here is the effectiveness of your August Council. I hope you recognize the urgency of the matter and the gravity of Israeli policies. It is incumbent upon the Council to exert its influence on Israel so it refrains from any unilateral measures that will further inflame tensions and endanger stability and peace in the Middle East. I would even say they have the potential of igniting a religious war in and beyond our region. A religious war, and that is not a small play. We should be united in our condemnation and rejection of this uncancelled, uncalled for provocation. And Israel must be made to recognize that its nefarious, self-centered plans will remain inadmissible and will never gain any international acceptance. Thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie Son Excellence Monsieur Aboul Khait de sa déclaration. Je donne maintenant la parole aux membres du Conseil de sécurité. Je donne la parole à Son Excellence Sir Louis Straker, vice-premier ministre et ministre des Affaires étrangères et du Commerce international de Saint-Vincent et les Grenadines.
Mr. President, Secretary General António Guterres, let me begin by thanking the briefers for their remarks on the evolving situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. The long-cherished dream of peace in the Middle East is one we must continue to toil for, with the hope that future generations of Palestinians and Israelis can work, play, study, and pray beside one another in a tranquil and tolerant atmosphere. Mr. President, security is, at its very core, a collective project. It denotes a lasting relationship based on the foundational values of trust and respect, in which concerned parties choose peaceful coexistence over fear and coercion. It is in this regard that St. Vincent and the Grenadines stands firm in its condemnation of ongoing settlement activities across the West Bank, which constitute clear violations of international law that gravely imperil the peace process. The internationally agreed two-state solution based on pre-1967 borderlines remains the most credible path on our painstaking quest for peace between Israel and Palestine. We implore the state of Israel to adhere to the provisions of all relevant United Nations resolutions, including Resolution 2334, which reflect the international community's position on the occupied Palestinian territories. Only through dialogue and compromise, respectful of the principles of international law, can security for Israel be assured as Palestinian claims to dignity, equality, and human rights are honored. History has taught us that lasting peace can only be achieved through sincere attempts at reconciliation. And reconciliation is only possible when justice and fairness pave the way to mutual satisfaction and harmony. As unilateral annexation of the West Bank looms, the narrow window for a sustainable peace is rapidly closing. Annexation would permanently alter the security landscape and destabilize the region. St. Vincent and the Grenadines urges all parties to let judgment and pragmatism prevail. We call on the State of Israel to immediately cease all plans for annexation and return to the bargaining table to negotiate with their Palestinian neighbors in good faith. To this end, we encourage all members of the international community to facilitate this much-needed dialogue as the critical first step towards an solution. We also encourage renewed international...
Sorry, League of Arab States, please mute your microphone. League of Arab States, please mute your microphone. League of Arab States, please mute your microphone.
We also encourage renewed international financial support to the United Nations Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA, which provides vital humanitarian assistance and social protections to millions of Palestinian refugees. As such, we welcome the recently convened pledging conference to mobilize political and financial support for UNRWA. Excellencies, today we stand at a dangerous crossroad. The core principles upon which our United Nations was founded are gradually eroding. On issues as complex and consequential as the fragile peace process in the Middle East, we can ill afford the ongoing repudiation of the bedrock principles of our multilateral system. The political independence and territorial integrity of all states must be safeguarded as we cast our collective gaze towards the urgent challenges of COVID-19 and the ever-growing climate change. During this 75th year of the United Nations, we must remain candid and upright in our pronouncements. Continued peace in the face of grave injustice, wheresoever and by whomsoever committed, is in itself the blank canvas upon which immense human suffering is rendered. At this critical juncture, we cannot be separated in interest or divided in purpose. We must stand together resolutely and unequivocally demand peace and justice for all. I thank you.
Je remercie son Excellence Sir Straker de sa déclaration. Je donne à présent la parole à son Excellence Monsieur Noureddin Erré, ministre tunisien des Affaires étrangères.
Thank you, Mr. President. السيد الرئيس، السيد الأمين العام للأمم المتحدة، السيد الأمين العام لجامعة الدول العربية، السيدات والسادة الوزراء أصحاب السعادة. في البداية أعرب عن فائق التقدير لمعالي الأمين العام للأمم المتحدة السيد أنطونيو غوتيريس على كلمته الافتتاحية، وأجدد له تثمين تونس لجهوده المتواصلة لدفع مسار السلام في الشرق الأوسط. كما أرحب بمعالي السيد أحمد أبو الغيط الأمين العام لجامعة الدول العربية، وأشكره على الإحاطة التي قدمها لأعضاء المجلس. كما يطيب لي في أن أتوجه بالشكر للرئاسة الفرنسية لمجلس الأمن على تفاعلها الإيجابي مع طلب عقد هذه الجلسة على المستوى الوزاري، وأرحب بنظرائي وممثلي الدول الشقيقة والصديقة. سيد الرئيس، ينعقد هذا الاجتماع الهام والأمم المتحدة تستعد للاحتفال بعيدها 75 بكل المعاني والدلالات العميقة لهذه المناسبة التي تمثل موعدا متجددا لتأكيد تمسكنا جميعا بمقاصد ميثاق منظمتنا، وتأكيد الأهمية المحورية والمتجددة للقوانين والمواثيق الدولية في تنظيم العلاقات الدولية وتعزيز مقومات الأمن والسلم الدوليين. ومن المفارقات أن اجتماعنا يأتي بالمقابل أياما قليلة قبل محطة أخرى في مسار استهتار إسرائيل بالشرعية الدولية، متمثلة في الموعد الذي أعلن عنه رئيس حكومتها للبدء في تنظيم أو في تنفيذ مخطط ضم أجزاء من الأراضي الفلسطينية في خرق جسيم وفاضح للقانون الدولي وقرارات الشرعية الدولية، وفي تحد صارخ للمجموعة الدولية التي عبرت من خلال المواقف الوطنية الرسمية والشعبية وعبر المنظمات والتجمعات الإقليمية والجغرافية عن رفض واضح لهذه السياسات العدوانية. سيد الرئيس، على امتداد أكثر من 7 عقود أمعنت إسرائيل القوة القائمة بالاحتلال، ولا زالت في ممارساتها العدوانية ضد الشعب الفلسطيني الشقيق، وفي الاستيلاء على الأراضي وهدم البيوت وتنفيذ المشاريع الاستيطانية وانتهاك المقدسات، إلى جانب تجديد إجراءات الإغلاق والحصار الجائر والخنق الاقتصادي وكل أشكال العقاب الجماعي الأخرى. وبالموازاة مع ذلك، ورغم الجهود الدولية والقرارات العديدة لمجلس الأمن والجمعية العامة للأمم المتحدة والاتفاقات المبرمة، لم تكتف الحكومات الإسرائيلية المتعاقبة بتجاهل تلك القرارات وانتهاكها، بل أقدمت على اتخاذ سلسلة من القرارات والإجراءات الأحادية في إطار سياسة فرض الأمر الواقع لتغيير الوضع القانوني والتاريخي للأراضي العربية المحتلة وتنفيذ مخططاتها التوسعية، من ذلك القرارات المتعلقة بضم القدس الشرقية وفرض سيادة إسرائيل عليها وتغيير تركيبتها الديمغرافية وتهويد أحيائها، وقرار فرض السيادة على الجولان السوري المحتل وما يسمى بقانون الدولة القومية، ومشاريع بناء الآلاف الوحدات الاستيطانية، والآن مخطط ضم أجزاء من الضفة الغربية بما في ذلك غور الأردن وشمال البحر الميت. سيد الرئيس، إن مخطط الضم المذكور يمثل انتهاكا جسيما للقانون الدولي واستهتارا بالقرارات الأممية وإيغالا في العدوان على الحقوق المشروعة للشعب الفلسطيني، وإحباطا لأي مسعى لإعادة إطلاق مسار السلام الذي يمثل ضرورة ملحة إقليميا ودوليا، كما ستكون له تداعيات بالغة الخطورة على مجمل الأوضاع بالمنطقة. وإزاء كل ذلك، فإن تونس تدعو مجددا من منبر مجلس الأمن المجتمع الدولي إلى تحمل مسؤولياته في هذه المرحلة الحاسمة من خلال التصدي لهذا المخطط ومنع تنفيذه، باعتبار ذلك أولوية ملحة من أجل حماية القانون الدولي وإرادة السلام ومنع انزلاق الأوضاع في المنطقة نحو دوامة جديدة من العنف والانفلات. كما تؤكد على ضرورة إبلاغ الجانب الإسرائيلي رسالة قوية وواضحة مفادها رفض المجتمع الدولي لمخطط الضم وعدم السماح بمواصلة انتهاك القانون الدولي وتعريض الأمن والسلم والاستقرار في المنطقة والعالم للخطر. ومن منطق ثوابت سياساتها الخارجية، فإن تونس تجدد اليوم تأكيد موقفها الثابت والمبدئي في الوقوف إلى جانب الشعب الفلسطيني الشقيق في نضاله من أجل استرجاع حقوقه المشروعة وإقامة دولته المستقلة ذات السيادة على أرضه في حدود 4 جوان 1967 وعاصمتها القدس الشرقية، وتسوية جميع قضايا الحل النهائي، وذلك في إطار سلام عادل وشامل وفق قرارات الشرعية الدولية وحل الدولتين ومبادرة السلام العربية. كما تؤكد تونس أن الحقوق الفلسطينية لا تسقط بالتقادم، وأن إجراءات سلطات الاحتلال الإسرائيلية باطلة وكل ما ينتج عنها مرفوض ولا تترتب عنه أي آثار قانونية. السيد الرئيس، إن رفضنا المطلق لمخطط الضم ودعوتنا لتضافر الجهود الدولية للتصدي له ومنع تنفيذه عاجلا وآجلا لا تضاهيه إلا مطالبتنا بإنهاء الاحتلال باعتباره السبب المباشر والعنوان للمأساة القائمة منذ أكثر من 70 سنة بكل ما رافقها وانجرى عنها من اعتداءات وانتهاكات ما زال الشعب الفلسطيني الشقيق يتعرض لها بشكل متواصل وممنهج. وفي هذا الإطار فإننا نجدد مطالبتنا مجلس الأمن بالعمل على حمل إسرائيل على إنهاء الاحتلال والانسحاب من كافة الأراضي الفلسطينية والعربية إلى حدود 4 جوان 1967 وفق جدول زمني محدد. كما نشدد على أهمية العمل على إعادة إطلاق مسار تحقيق السلام العادل والشامل وفق المرجعيات الدولية المتفق عليها. كما تؤكد تونس على أهمية توفير الحماية الدولية للشعب الفلسطيني وإنهاء الحصار الجائر المفروض على غزة ووضع حد لكافة أشكال التمييز والعقاب الجماعي الأخرى. وتدعو المجموعة الدولية إلى مواصلة دعمها لجهود السلطة الفلسطينية من أجل مجابهة التحديات الاقتصادية والاجتماعية والإنسانية المتفاقمة نتيجة تواصل الاحتلال والتهديد الوبائي المستجد. في الختام، تؤكد تونس مجددا أن المنطقة لا يمكن أن تستعيد أمنها واستقرارها وتنعم شعوبها بالعيش في سلام ما لم يتم التوصل إلى التسوية العادلة والشاملة للصراع العربي الإسرائيلي. أجدد شكري وتقديري للأمين العام للأمم المتحدة السيد أنطونيو غوتيريس وللرئاسة الفرنسية لمجلس الأمن ولكل الدول الشقيقة والصديقة التي عبرت عن تمسكها بالقانون الدولي وميثاق الأمم المتحدة والقيم الكونية للسلام. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Thank you.
Je remercie son Excellence, Monsieur Herrey, de sa déclaration. Je donne maintenant la parole à son Excellence, Madame Retno Marsudi, ministre indonésienne des Affaires étrangères.
President, although the Council regularly meets to discuss the situation in Palestine, it is clear that our meeting today is far from a regular one. The fact that the ministers and deputy minister participated in this meeting is clear evidence that the situation is very concerning. Mr. President, the Secretary General in his new report warned us of the crucial situation at hand posed by the occupying power and the threat of its annexation in Palestine. For far too long, the Palestinian people have suffered injustice, grave violation of human rights, and a deteriorating humanitarian situation. With the looming threat of annexation, the future of Palestine is at stake. Now it is up to us whether we want to stand on the side of the international law or turn a blind eye, stand on the other side, and allow acts against international law and principle continue to take place. We must and should reject the plan of annexation based on the following points. First, the formal annexation would constitute a clear violation of international law. The de facto annexation or the creeping annexation has breached international law. If we allow the de facto annexation to manifest into formal annexation, then we are setting a dangerous precedent that somehow occupying the land of others by way of annexation can be lawful under international law. It is an impunity on itself, and our silence signals approval. So let us all show our strong objection in all fora, both by words and action, that annexation is illegal. Second, the formal annexation is an open challenge to the Security Council. It tests the credibility and the legitimacy of this council. The official declaration of annexation in May has justified the Security Council to swiftly act under the UN Charter. My question now, why should the Council wait for the annexation to happen in order to assume its function? In short, no matter who poses a threat to the international peace and security, they should be held accountable before the Council. There should be no double standard. And third, and most importantly, Mr. Chairman, the formal annexation will destroy all prospect of peace. This will also create instability in the region and beyond. There is an urgent need for a credible peace process that allows all relevant parties to work on equal footing. Hence, it is high time to start a credible multilateral peace process based on internationally agreed parameters. For Indonesia, lasting peace can only be achieved based on the two-state solution. My final point, Mr. President, is to address the humanitarian needs in Palestine. The pandemic has worsened the hardship faced by the Palestinian people. It is crucial to enhance our support for international humanitarian agencies, particularly the UNRWA. Just yesterday, I announced Indonesia increased contribution to the Palestine as well as to the UNRWA during the pledging conference. Our support to Palestine will also be channeled through the Palestinian Authority and humanitarian agencies. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, injustice prevails, not because of the absence of justice, but because we allow it to do so. So it is time to put a stop to it. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Je remercie son Excellence de sa déclaration. Je donne maintenant la parole à son Excellence Monsieur James Cleverly, ministre d'État pour le Moyen-Orient et l'Afrique du Nord du Royaume-Uni de Grande-Bretagne et d'Irlande du Nord.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, Special Coordinator Mladenov, and to the Secretary General of the League of Arab States for their respective briefings. Mr. President, I address the Council today at a critical juncture. Like many, I am troubled and frustrated by the lack of progress towards a two-state solution. In 1947, at the end of the British Mandate over Palestine, the General Assembly confirmed the international community's view of the need for a partition into two states. In 1993, the Palestine Liberation Organization recognized Israel and accepted the 1967 lines as the basis for the future boundary between Israel and Palestinian territories. It was a moment of great optimism. It marked Palestinian agreement to the solution Israel itself had accepted in 1947 and confirmed the only solution that the world could see. Despite moments of optimism, both parties have struggled to find the common ground needed for a lasting, peaceful settlement. It has always been true that any peace settlement needs the support of both peoples, because a settlement and peace must be agreed and not imposed. But it also needs pragmatism and flexibility from both sides. The Secretary-General, in his report on the implementation of Resolution 2334, and the Special Coordinator in his briefing to the Council today, have outlined the many elements that have stalled in the peace process. We have heard about settlement expansions, increases in demolitions, seizures, and worsening settler violence. The UK has long urged Israel to end these counterproductive activities. Meanwhile, Palestinian militants have fired rockets and launched incendiary devices from Gaza, threatening Israel's security. Israelis have suffered from the scourge of terrorism and anti-Semitic incitement. Let me be clear. The United Kingdom is committed to Israeli security. We condemn all forms of incitement and anti-Semitism wholeheartedly. Most critically, Israel's plans to annex part of the West Bank pose a significant and possibly existential threat to the peace process. The UK has been clear in this Council and beyond that unilateral action is unacceptable. Annexation risks signalling Israeli rejection of the very solution Israel and the international community agreed in 1947. As my Prime Minister said on the 16th of June, the UK strongly opposes annexation, which would breach international law. The United Kingdom will not recognise any unilateral attempt to change the border. Such a step would go against the rules-based international order and the UN Charter. Annexation could not go unanswered, and we implore Israel to reconsider. Such a step has the potential to trigger regional instability, threatening Israel's own security. It could have a real impact on Israel's relations with its neighbours, as well as the wider international community. Let us not forget the consequences for those most directly affected, the Palestinian people. We cannot predict the implications that a loss of hope would bring. We cannot say with certainty, but we can say with some degree of certainty that it is the extremists who would benefit most. Mr. President, we have to find another way. A lasting agreement will only be achieved by real movement towards renewed peace, by negotiation. Negotiations that create a viable and sovereign Palestinian state, living in peace and security side by side with Israel, based on the 1967 borders, with agreed land swaps, Jerusalem as the shared capital of both states, and a just, fair, agreed, and realistic settlement for refugees. I address this Council today to express the United Kingdom's willingness to stand with the Israeli and Palestinian leaderships in choosing the path for dialogue. We do not underestimate the challenges, but firmly believe that with bold leadership, peace is possible. The UK stands ready to support all efforts to achieve a lasting and peaceful solution. We recognise that the United States retains a key role in the Middle East peace process. So we urge the United States, Israel, and the Palestinian leadership to find a means of restarting discussions supported by the international community. As I have said, flexibility, pragmatism, and indeed compromise will be needed on all sides. We understand this path is not easy, but we must do all we can to pursue a negotiated outcome. Mr. President, a peace imposed is no peace at all. It will achieve no more than sow the seeds of future mistrust and instability. Both Israelis and Palestinians deserve better. Despite the setbacks, the UK continues to believe profoundly that a negotiated, genuine two-state solution is the only viable means of bringing lasting peace and stability to Israelis and Palestinians. It is the only way to preserve Israel's Jewish democratic identity and realize Palestinians' rights, including self-determination. And it is the only way to bring a permanent end to this conflict. Thank you.
Je remercie Son Excellence Monsieur Cleverly de sa déclaration et je donne à présent la parole à Son Excellence Monsieur Dang Minh Khoi, vice-ministre vietnamien des Affaires étrangères.
Mr. President, at the outset, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the French presidency of the Council for organizing this important meeting on the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. My delegation also wishes to thank the UN Secretary General and other briefers for their comprehensive briefings. Mr. President, the Middle East is a region of great geopolitical significance, which had attracted much international attention in recent years. Needless to say, instability in the region can pose multifaceted and complex implications to the international peace and security. Among those, perhaps the situation most desired to be addressed is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Unresolved historical, religious, and territorial issues have contributed to the protraction of tension and conflict even since the early years of the negotiation, causing tremendous losses and casualties, especially to the Palestinian people. Vietnam joins the international community in our unwavering support for the legitimate struggle of the Palestinian people and their inalienable rights. We strongly support the two-state solution, including the establishment of the state of Palestine with East Jerusalem at its capital, that peacefully coexists alongside the state of Israel with secure and internationally recognized borders on the basis of the pre-1967 lines and negotiated settlement, and in accordance with the international law, the UN Charter, and the relevant UN resolution, including the Security Council Resolution 2334. Vietnam has closely followed the situation in the Gaza Strip. We share the international community concern over information on Israeli possible annexation of parts of the occupied Palestinian territory in the West Bank, which, if so, may exert serious impacts on the viability of the two-state solution, as well as to the peace and stability in the Middle East. Vietnam therefore calls on the parties concerned to refrain from any unilateral action that may complicate the situation or escalate ongoing tension. We further urge the parties to continue to exercise self-restraint, refrain from the use of force or incitement to violence. As the COVID-19 pandemic continues to spread in the Middle East, we call on relevant parties to facilitate humanitarian activity to support the Palestinian Authority, respond and prevent further economic, social, and humanitarian burdens for the Palestinian people. Vietnam supports the continuing efforts aimed at reaching a comprehensive, just, and lasting settlement of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict through dialogues and negotiation, that helping to protect the lives of people and ensure the legitimate interests of the parties concerned, as well as promote peace, stability, and development in the Middle East. To this end, Vietnam welcomes all initiative and efforts of the national stakeholders and the Palestinian people to restart the Middle East peace process. We will actively contribute to fostering direct discussion between Israel and Palestine within and beyond the United Nations framework. Mr. President, Vietnam also wishes to take this opportunity to express its appreciation and strongly support to the roles and endeavors of the United Nations, the UN Secretary General, and the Special Coordinator. Of its ability, Vietnam has continued to make financial contribution to the United Nations Relief and Work Agency for Palestinian Refugees, and calls upon the international community to strengthen budgetary support for this agency in order to provide adequate and timely humanitarian assistance to the Palestinian people. Thank you for your attention.
Je remercie Son Excellence Monsieur Dang de sa déclaration. Je donne maintenant la parole à Son Excellence Monsieur Alvin Boats, vice-ministre sud-africain des relations extérieures et de la coopération internationale.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Allow me to express my gratitude for you for calling this special session today. Our deliberations should by no means be seen as business as usual. In this regard, I would like to thank Mr. Nickolay Mladenov for his insightful yet perturbing account on the situation in the Middle East, more specifically the question of Palestine. 72 years ago, we spoke about a catastrophe, a period in Palestine history known as the Al-Nakba, when more than 700,000 Palestinians were forced to abandon their homeland and seek refuge in neighboring countries and abroad as a Jewish state came into being on Palestine's soil. Today, 72 years later, it will seem Palestinians are facing another imminent catastrophe, as Israel is set to advance legislation to annex parts of the West Bank and Jordan Valley from as early as the 1st of July 2020. These threats and pronouncements of annexation are in stark violation of international law, disregard for international humanitarian law, disregard for the United Nations Security Council resolutions, including Resolution 446 of 1979 and Resolution 2334 of 2016. Which agreed upon parameters for peace and further undermining any prospect of peace between parties. Mr. President, for more than half a century, the world has stood by and watched as Palestinian land, olive grove by olive grove, village by village, town by town has been lost. We have witnessed the daily suffering of Palestinians as they are subjected to the continued construction and expansion of illegal Israeli settlements on their rightful land. We have watched as Palestinians had to endure systematic discrimination as opposed to settlers who are provided services and allowed civil liberties such as freedom of movement and the issuings of building permits. Right denied to Palestinians living in the occupied territories. Moreover, Mr. President, we have observed as Palestine land and property was seized and livelihoods snatched away and destroyed, despite being on the right side of the law, as determined by international law and numerous United Nations General Assembly and Security Council resolutions. We have borne witness as violence, riots, and civil disobedient campaigns have swept across the West Bank and Gaza strips, as Palestinian people have engaged in the struggle for the inalienable right to freedom and self-determination. We have looked on as men, women, the elderly, and children have been victimized, assaulted, and detained. Mr. President, we have looked on as the humanitarian situation has continued to deteriorate in the Gaza Strip, with Palestinians continue to live in unacceptable, precarious circumstances, where the movement has been restricted, where they have been given limited access to water and electricity, and deprived of the basic human rights you and I take for granted on a daily basis. We have also witnessed the occupying power restricting access to educational and economic opportunities, Additionally, at a time when the world is facing a global pandemic with the spread of COVID-19, the Palestinian people have to contend with a severely overburdened and already fragile healthcare system. We have also unfortunately seen the reduction of contributions to the UN Relief and Works Agency, which for decades has been providing basic social and humanitarian services to Palestine. Mr. President, it is said that history has a way of repeating itself. Yet it will appear that we do not learn from these turbulent and painful, unjust historical events which continue to shape our own present. My own country, South Africa, has in its past not been spared these injustices. When one people is assigned a higher value above another, this unfortunately runs at the core of the occupation of Palestine, and it threatens peace, stability, and security, a collective value that is at the core of the United Nations, which is commemorating its 75th anniversary this year. Yet we have to ask ourselves, what is the reason of the Security Council if we continue to look away in another direction, adopt hollow resolutions, and ignore current resolutions and fail to act against those that so arrogantly defy the very principles that this organization has been founded on? Israel, the occupying power of Palestine, has consistently illustrated through its action a total disrespect for legality and justice. This is once again evident in the Secretary General's 14th quarterly report on the implementation of Resolution 2334 of 2016, in which there are detailed accounts of continuous settlement activity by the occupying power, despite the intentions as adopted by the Security Council resolutions, such as Resolution 2334. In this regard, South Africa concurs with the observation by the Secretary General that, and I quote, the establishment and expansion of settlements fuel resentment, hopelessness, and disillusionment amongst the Palestinians and are key drivers of human rights violations and significantly heighten Israeli-Palestine tensions. Therefore, the intended annexation of more Palestine land should be regarded as the proverbial straw that breaks the camel's back. It is time that Israel, as the occupying power, be held accountable for its illegal actions and consistent violations of international law and resolutions of this Council. To date, the Security Council has taken no action to stop the building of settlements on illegally occupied land or to stop the confiscation and destruction of Palestine land and property, and to stop the illegal blockade of Gaza. This Security Council's inaction is carried on for far too long, and in doing so has failed the people of Palestine. How can we expect to remain credible and call on parties in other areas of conflict on the Council's agenda to abide by and implement resolutions or face further Council action when we seemingly condone the actions of the Israeli government by failing to act against its violations? Mr. President, it is our submission in South Africa that we should be ashamed of ourselves. We should be ashamed that on our watch we have ignored and denied Palestinians their basic human rights and aspirations. We should be ashamed because of our silence. We have protected the oppressed instead of the oppressed. We should be ashamed that decades later a lasting and just peaceful resolution of the continued occupation remains as elusive as it did in 1948, when this matter was first brought to the Security Council. We should therefore ask ourselves what messages it is that we are sending to those who are fighting for the inalienable rights to freedom, self-determination, and sovereignty, and those that oppress and deny these rights. Mr. President, allow me to reiterate that South Africa will continue to support all efforts aimed at establishing a viable, contiguous Palestine state existing side by side and in peace with Israel, within internationally recognized borders based on the the 4th June 1967 with East Jerusalem as its capital, in line with all relevant UN resolutions, international law, and internationally agreed parameters. In this regard, peace can only prevail once both parties engage in inclusive dialogue and constructive negotiations without preconditions, as this is the only means to ensure lasting peace, security, and stability. Additionally, there must be accountable mechanism in this dialogue to ensure that commitments made are actually implemented. To this end, a viable and sustainable peace plan for the Middle East must ensure that the sovereignty of the Palestine, their territorial integrity and economic viability is guaranteed with sovereign equality between Palestine and Israel. I thank you very much, Mr. President.
Je remercie Son Excellence Monsieur Botz de sa déclaration. Je donne à présent la parole aux représentants du Conseil. Je donne maintenant la parole à la représentante des États-Unis.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Secretary General, for your opening remarks. And thank you, Mr. Mladenov, for your briefing. We appreciate all the hard work you and your team are putting into addressing this continued conflict. I'd also like to welcome the ministers and the representative from the Arab League to our virtual discussion today. Peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians is the primary reason we are gathered here today, and President Trump has dedicated so much time and energy into developing the vision for peace. The United States cares deeply about the people in the region, and we believe that the status quo hurts both the Israelis and the Palestinians, and that no one benefits from the existing situation, a perpetual limbo of suffering, lost opportunities, reliance on foreign assistance, and repeated cycles of violence, war, and destruction. That is why our team has dedicated 3 years to finding a way forward for the past failed attempts to an alternate path towards peace and resolution to the conflict. President Trump's vision for peace is a genuine effort at peacemaking. It is designed to lead the sides to a realistic two-state solution, offering a viable path to Palestinian statehood, in which Palestinians' legitimate aspirations for independence and national dignity can be realized in a peace agreement with Israel. President Trump stated on January 28th, "I was saddened by the fate of the Palestinian people. They deserve a far better life. They deserve the chance to achieve their extraordinary potential." End of quote. It takes courageous Israeli leadership to make the tough decisions and compromises to reach a settlement. This is the path to peace we must support with respect and understanding in an effort to make this happen. Without dismissing the hard work put in by dedicated peacemakers over the years, I think we can all agree that past efforts have not brought the sides closer to peace. There has been countless dollars spent, international conferences, and UN resolutions and statements on the issue, but little real progress. We believe that only bold thinking at this juncture, as laid out in the vision of peace, will ultimately be the benefit of the Israeli and Palestinian people. We understand that there are elements of our vision that some believe should be adjusted, and we've clarified on many occasions. It has never been our intent to impose a solution. Again, I ask that the international community and the Palestinian leadership not dismiss our vision out of hand and revert to past statements and arguments that have not led to real peace. I believe it is our collective responsibility for both the people of Israel and the citizens of a future Palestinian state to keep an open mind and willing to break with existing paradigms to seek resolution to this conflict. I understand that many of you have concerns with this issue of the potential extension of Israeli sovereignty in the West Bank. At the same time, we ask that you also hold the Palestinian leadership accountable for acts they are responsible for. It doesn't help anyone to look backwards and point to what could have been. The Palestinian leadership has a responsibility to pursue the prosperity of their people. At the end of the day, is reverting to old talking points the best we can do as an international community? United Nations TV archives contains multiple gatherings such as today. I think we can do better. Actually, you know what? I know we can do better. And I think we owe it to the future generations of Palestinians and Israelis to break this cycle and be a catalyst for change. So again, we urge the Palestinian leadership to look closely at our vision and engage us. As we said before, our plan is not a take it or leave it. It's not set in stone. It's an opening offer. It is the beginning of a conversation, not the end of one. All of the diplomats lined up here today will have presented or has presented their passionate speeches, however, not addressing the core issue here, the need for Palestinians and Israelis to work together. Whether it is condemning settlement activity or any other common criticism, the repetitive rhetoric we see in these meetings only inflames tensions, antagonizes the parties, and undercuts any chance of real, lasting peace. The hard truth isn't that there will never be a judicial resolution to the conflict, and arguments about who is wrong as a matter of international law will not bring about peace. This is a complex political problem that can only be solved by negotiations between Israeli and Palestinians. The United States, under the leadership of President Trump, is addressing this core issue by offering the beginning of a conversation. And I reiterate, the beginning of a conversation. We remain open to speaking with anyone about how to bring these parties to the table, and we both urge and welcome any and all engagement. Thank you.
Je remercie la représentante des États-Unis pour sa déclaration. Je donne à présent la parole au représentant de la Chine.
Mr. President, now I have the honor to read the statement of His Excellency Mr. Wang Yi, State Councilor and Foreign Minister of the People's Republic of China. Mr. President, dear colleagues, China welcomes this open VTC of the Security Council on the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. The question of Palestine, still unresolved after 70-plus years, continues to challenge human conscience and international justice. Despite flare-ups of other regional hotspots, the Palestinian question remains at the heart of the Middle East situation. Its just, equitable settlement is a prerequisite for lasting peace and security in the region. Recently, the persistent tension between Palestine and Israel has put the peace process in jeopardy and heightened the risk of regional conflicts. This development is deeply unsettling. Such a situation has further highlighted the significance of the four-point proposal of the Palestinian question put forth by President Xi Jinping in 2017. Based on this proposal, I wish to emphasize the following points. First, international consensus must not be contravened. The two-state solution is a bottom line of international justice on which there should be no backtracking. China supports the establishment of an independent state of Palestine that enjoys full sovereignty on the basis of the 1967 borders and with East Jerusalem as its capital. This is an inalienable right of the Palestinian people, one that cannot be compromised or bargained away. At the same time, Israel's right to survival and legitimate security concerns should be fully respected. Relevant UN resolutions, the Land for Peace principle, and the two-state solution set out the overall direction of the final settlement and embody the wisdom and hard work of several generations of people. They are important milestones in the Middle East peace process, and more importantly, the very foundation for resolving the Palestinian question. As such, they should be fully observed and reaffirmed. Second, peace talks must not be abandoned. Palestine and Israel are and will remain each other's neighbor. Seeking one's own absolute security with unilateral actions will only aggravate tensions and undermine mutual trust. The only viable way is for Palestine and Israel to resume dialogues on an equal footing as soon as possible in order to rebuild trust, de-escalate disputes, and work out a way to live in peace as neighbors. The ease of settlements is a key item of the final status talks. The Security Council has long made it clear that the establishment of those settlements constitutes violation under international law. The question of occupied territories in the West Bank should be resolved as early as possible based on relevant UN resolutions, and the final Palestine-Israel border delineated through peace talks. China calls on all relevant parties to remain committed to the strategic choice of peace talks, cherish the outcomes of the previous talks, and refrain from actions that may intensify tensions between Palestine and Israel. Third, international support must not slacken. The Palestinian question, instead of being marginalized, should remain front and center of the international agenda. The global community, especially countries with influence on Palestine and Israel, should stick to an impartial and just position, actively promote peace talks, and push forward the Middle East peace process with sincere efforts. Only when the voices of countries in that region, Palestine in particular, are heeded and all parties' concerns are accommodated, will the broadest consensus be achieved. Solution that departs from the track of peace will never bring enduring peace to the Middle East. China supports President Abbas' call for an international peace conference and an enlarged multilateral mechanism for peace, and will positively consider participating in ways appropriate. Fourth, humanitarian issues must not be ignored. COVID-19 has further deepened Palestine's economic and humanitarian plight. It's imperative to end the blockade on the Gaza Strip as soon as possible and earnestly fulfill the obligations under the Paris Protocol and other international treaties. The UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees in the Near East, UNRWA, has been working to ease the humanitarian situation for Palestinian refugees and the pressure on host countries. China appreciates its efforts and calls on the international community to support Palestine in growing its economy, facilitate the work of UNRWA, and help improve the humanitarian situation in Palestine. We oppose using the threat to cut off assistance as a tool to exert pressure. Mr. President, China is a sincere friend of the Palestinian people. We have all along followed the Middle East peace process with concern and remained a staunch force for international justice and fairness and for all efforts conducive to de-escalation. To help the Palestinian people fight COVID-19, China has provided medical supplies such as testing kits, masks, and protective suits, and has recently sent a team of Chinese experts to Palestine to comprehensively share experience on containment, diagnostics, and therapeutics. China values the role of UNRWA. This year, China will donate $1 million to the agency. provide anti-epidemic supplies to UNRWA-affiliated medical institutions, and through it, PPEs to Palestinian refugees in Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. Going forward, China will continue to support and help Palestine to the best of its ability. Mr. President, the Middle East is again at a crossroad between peace and turbulence. Shouldering the primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security, the Security Council should and must stand with peace and justice, with righteousness and conscience, and play its due role in bringing about a comprehensive, just, and enduring solution to the Palestinian question. I thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie le représentant de la Chine pour sa déclaration et je donne à présent la parole au représentant de la République dominicaine.
We thank Special Coordinator Nickolay Mladenov for his briefing on the current situation in the region. We welcome the Secretary General and the Secretary General of the League of Arab States, as well as the ministers that honor us with their presence. But allow me to take a brief moment to express our heartfelt condolences to the family of Sergeant Major Rama Wahyudi, the Indonesian official whose life was lost on the duty during the recent attack on MONUSCO, and condemn in the strongest terms such attack. We also wish a speedy recovery to the officer that was injured. Mr. President, we received with deep concern the latest details about the marked deterioration of the Israeli-Palestinian situation. The dangerous path which this conflict is heading towards erodes the prospect of the achievement of any sustainable peace. It has been well-warned unilateral actions that violate international law systematically put forward by one of the parties undermine the foundations to achieve such peace, prolong the conflict, and will further deteriorate the humanitarian situation of many Palestinians. Continuous violence, incitement, and provocations coupled with financial pressures and lack of internal reconciliation and a deep humanitarian crisis are elements that close the door to any prospect for renewed negotiations and will likely trigger more instability and suffering. No amount of humanitarian or economic support on its own will address the challenges Palestinians are experiencing. These ultimately require real political solutions to pursue them. The Dominican Republic's principles include respect for human rights and international law and committed to peaceful coexistence and solidarity among nations. We therefore reaffirm our full support for a two-state solution as said in the different UN resolutions and remain clinging to the framework based on previous bilateral agreements between Israelis and Palestinians. We encourage the parties to foster real dialogue and relaunch negotiations towards a peace plan based on internationally reached agreements. We commend the continued delivery of humanitarian and development assistance to Palestinians by the UN and other organizations, and we encourage others to urgently support these efforts. Unfortunately, the actions that have taken place to address the COVID-19 pandemic have created a negative shock to both Israeli and Palestinian economies. They have the potential to have profound repercussions on public welfare, employment, social cohesion, financial and fiscal stability. In this regard, we call for the immediate release of Palestinian children from Israeli detention facilities and allow them to return safely to their families and communities, and that new admissions to such facilities are halted. We also urge the Israeli authorities to ensure that children in their jurisdiction enjoy the highest attainable health standards and that they are protected from violence, abuse, and exploitation. Mr. President, damaged infrastructure, reduced services, food insecurity, discrimination, and displacement caused by the conflict have had particular impact on women, notably on those in the marginalized Palestinian territories. As an international community, we must understand that our collective action must be aimed at contributing in an impartial and effective way to the search for real solutions. We must collectively reaffirm the need to increase efforts to continue working until we achieve a constructive dialogue that paves the way to a new stage towards building a truce between Israel and Palestine. To conclude, we would like to call against any unilateral action that undermines the mutual respect, solidarity, and justice that needs to exist in the common search for peace. The current path that this situation has taken will only push Palestinians and Israelis further apart, deepen the occupation, and jeopardize the future viability of the two-state solution. I thank you.
Je remercie le représentant de la République dominicaine pour sa déclaration et je donne à présent la parole au représentant de l'Allemagne.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for having this discussion today. To start, let me go back what the Secretary General said at the opening of the debate. He said that we are today at a watershed moment, and the Deputy Prime Minister of St. Vincent and Grenadines said that we are at dangerous crossroads. The Minister of State of UK said that we are at a critical juncture. So I think we all share, and Germany shares this assessment that we are at a very critical stage. The Secretary General, in his introductory remarks, also said that the annexation of occupied Palestinian territories would represent a most serious violation of international law. Germany shares this assessment. We are at a watershed moment. We are a watershed moment for Israel, for its security, for its standing within the international community, for its close relationship with the European Union and its member states. We are at a watershed for the prospects for a two-state solution and the implications of a potential one-state alternative. We are at a watershed moment for the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinians to an own state. We are at a watershed moment for regional stability, and we are at a watershed moment for the international community and the United Nations. As I said, the Secretary General said that we are faced potentially with the most serious violation of international law. Let us remember that the respect for international law is at the basis of the United Nations. This is the very foundation of the United Nations, the respect for international law. And this respect undermines the United Nations. And let me remind all colleagues and those colleagues who think that past resolutions may not be relevant anymore. They remain binding international law, and Resolution 2334, which after all is just 3 years old, represents binding international law. Germany is a very close partner and friend of Israel, deeply cares about its security, and it's today exactly 2 weeks ago that German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas traveled to Israel. He met with Prime Minister Netanyahu, he met with alternate Prime Minister Gantz, he met with Foreign Minister Ashkenazi, and he conveyed Germany's concern with regard to the annexation plans. Foreign Minister Maas also met with the Jordan Foreign Minister Safadi and the Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammed Shtayyeh, and confirmed how urgent it is to prevent annexation. let me in this context also repeat Germany's continued support for UNRWA. So where do we go from here? Let me repeat the call for a return to the negotiating table. And Germany supports the proposal to revive the Middle East Quartet. We call on all members of the quartet to demonstrate flexibility in order to overcome the differences and move forward. And in this respect, I listened very carefully to what the US Ambassador Kelly Craft said, and I found encouraging what she said about the openness of the US to re-engage in talks. I would urge her also to promote a meeting of the Middle East Quartet. The basis for these negotiations then have to be international law, international agreed parameters, which we consider the only viable solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflicts, because they meet the Israeli and Palestinian security needs, and they fulfill the Palestinian aspirations for statehood and sovereignty. When I say that we have to respect international law, when I refer to Resolution 2334, of course, all aspects of these resolutions have to be implemented, although those with regard to settlements, but also with regard to all acts of violence, violence against civilians, incitement, provocative actions, and inflammatory rhetoric. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Je remercie le représentant de l'Allemagne pour sa déclaration et je donne à présent la parole au représentant de l'Estonie.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I would like to thank His Excellency Mr. Ahmed Abdul-Gate and the Special Coordinator Mladenov for their briefings. We have welcomed the initiative taken by US that has given us impetus to revive the Middle East peace process. The counter-proposal submitted by the Palestinian Authority to the Middle East Quartet is a good step in the right direction. It is essential that both parties take steps to engage in a constructive dialogue with the aim to achieve a negotiated two-state solution, taking into account the legitimate aspirations of both parties and Israeli security concerns. In order to keep the momentum alive for moving towards peace, it is vital to refrain from any unilateral steps that would undermine it. A unilateral annexation of parts of the occupied West Bank would undermine the prospects of a negotiated two-state solution and threaten the stability of the region. We are concerned also about Israel's continued settlement activity in the occupied Palestinian territories, including in East Jerusalem. I would like to recall an important element of the Resolution 2334 to prevent all acts of violence against civilians, acts of terror, incitement, and acts of provocation. Although during the recent months, the situation in Gaza has remained relatively calm, we stress that firing rockets from Gaza into Israel, as well as any other form of violence targeting civilian population, is unacceptable. We are worried about the announcement by the Palestinian leadership regarding terminating agreements with Israel and the United States, including security cooperation. We call on the Palestinian Authority to reconsider the decision and to remain committed to the Oslo Agreement. For engaging in the direct negotiations, both parties need governments with legitimate and democratic mandate. We encourage the Palestinian Authority to set a date for the holding of elections throughout the occupied Palestinian territories. Finally, we reiterate the important role of UNRWA in supporting the efforts to prevent a major COVID-19 outbreak in the occupied Palestinian territories. We commend Jordan and Sweden for organizing the pledging conference to raise funds for the agency's needs, which took place yesterday. Estonia has been a long-standing contributor to UNRWA with an annual core funding of 80,000 euros, and for the year 2020, we have already allocated additional 200,000 euros to support UNRWA's activities. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Monsieur le Président, votre microphone est fermé.
Je remercie ASMIC d'abord, et je remercie ensuite le représentant de l'Estonie pour sa déclaration, et je donne à présent la parole au représentant de la Belgique.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I thank the ESG for its introduction, as well as Special Coordinator Nickolay Mladenov for his briefing. And I welcome the participation of the Secretary General of the League of Arab States and the many ministers present today. We welcome the written report of the Secretary General and fully subscribe to his observation. And, Mr. President, we share the deep concern expressed here today by the Secretary General regarding the stated intention of the government of Israel to annex part of the occupied West Bank. And it is a concern largely shared by this Council, as we are hearing today, and the wider international community, as mentioned in the report. A unilateral decision formalizing an annexation, even limited in scope, would constitute a clear breach of international law, as the Secretary General said, including the UN Charter, the Fourth Geneva Convention, and the resolution of this Council. Belgium will not recognize any changes to the pre-1967 borders, including Jerusalem, other than those agreed upon by the parties through direct negotiations. The West Bank will stay an occupied territory under international humanitarian law. We will continue to distinguish between the territory of the State of Israel and the territories occupied since 1967. Following our obligations under international law and EU law, annexation will have an impact on the bilateral relations between Belgium and Israel, and will also inevitably have significant consequences for the relationship between Israel and the European Union, as was stated by the EU High Representative Joseph Borrell. In addition to its legal, political, and economic consequences, annexation also risks gravely imperiling the security situation on the ground and in the wider region, thus undermining efforts to achieve regional peace and stability. Belgium is equally concerned by the negative impact of such a move on human rights and on the humanitarian situation in the occupied territory, including through the potential imposition of a two-tiered system of unequal political, social, and economic rights based on ethnicity. Not only will it further exacerbate issues related to the occupation, such as movement and access restrictions, basic service delivery, and land property, but it will also further affect communities that are already among the most vulnerable in the Palestinian population, leading to an increased coercive environment that would further fuel instability. Furthermore, annexation would deliver a devastating blow to the viability of a Palestinian state and a two-state solution, and would close the door for future negotiations. We therefore strongly urge Israel to refrain from any unilateral decision that would lead to the annexation of any parts of occupied Palestinian territory. We also call on the international community, and especially those states with influence, to exert all efforts to prevent any such steps. Mr. President, the intention of the Israeli government to annex parts of the occupied West Bank has led the Palestinian Authority to consider itself absolved of the agreements and understandings with Israel and the United States in the security and civilian areas. On June 3rd, the Palestinian Authority announced that it will refuse to receive the clearance funds collected by Israel on its behalf. We are concerned about the consequences of these developments, specifically the socio-economic and humanitarian impact. Only through meaningful and direct negotiations will it be possible to come to a two-state solution that meets Israeli and Palestinian security needs and Palestinian aspiration for statehood and sovereignty. We have taken note of the Palestinian leadership's willingness to achieve a just and comprehensive peace, as mentioned in the report. Against this backdrop, it is all the more important that all Palestinian factions invest in the reunification of Gaza and the West Bank under a single, democratic, national government. We strongly encourage the holding of elections once conditions permit it. Mr. President, it is important that the international community puts its weight behind efforts to start meaningful negotiations. In this regard, we welcome the conference call held on the 22nd of May at the level of envoys of the Middle East Quartet. We hope that efforts within this format or an enlarged format can continue. We are convinced that only through a negotiated solution based on the internationally agreed parameters and respect for international law, just and lasting peace can be achieved. The fulfillment of the aspirations of only one side will only lead to more instability in Israel and Palestine, but also in the wider region, as well as to the perpetuation of conflict. I thank you.
Je remercie le représentant de la Belgique pour sa déclaration et je donne à présent la parole au représentant de la Fédération de Russie.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I would like to begin by joining others in expressing condolences to Gianni, Minister Marsudi, and Indonesian people for the tragic loss of the Indonesian peacekeeper. Mr. President, we welcome high-level representatives participating in today's Security Council VTC on the situation in the Middle East. We thank the Secretary General, Special Coordinator Nickolay Mladenov, the Secretary General of the League of Arab States, Ahmed Abul-Gheit, for their briefings. Now, Mr. President, I have the honor to read a statement of Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, Sergei Lavrov, who could not be present in person at this meeting because, as you know, we have today celebrations related to the 75th anniversary of ending of the Great Patriotic War, and he's personally participating now in these events. So I read the statement of Minister Lavrov. Mr. President, In this challenging time, as the world struggles to find ways to counter and overcome the consequences of the coronavirus pandemic, the international community should not forget about a problem that, despite decades of efforts, is still awaiting its just solution. Palestinian-Israeli settlement is the key to resolving many other problems in the Middle East and to establishing a just, sustainable, comprehensive, and lasting peace in this region. The Palestinian question, which is almost the same age as the United Nations, requires our special and urgent attention. We are at a doorstep, in fact, just a few days away from a decision that could undermine efforts to achieve a just and sustainable Middle East settlement. Starting July 1st, the process of annexation of the occupied Palestinian territories in the West Bank of the Jordan River may be launched by the Israeli parliament. This is perhaps one of the most serious challenges for the Palestinian cause and for the whole region. As a permanent member of the UN Security Council and a member of the Quartet of International Mediators, Russia has always stood and stands against unilateral actions or plans that, as history has shown, are not capable of bringing peace to the Middle East and prejudge final settlement. This understanding is shared by the vast majority of international community. Implementation of the aforementioned unilateral plans may erase prospects of the two-state solution. And we see no alternative to the two-state solution. We see no alternative to the two states, Palestine and Israel, coexisting in peace and security. But the issue of statehood is not the sole one. Other aspects of the final status, Jerusalem, refugees, borders, water, settlements, are also pending. But annexation may permanently block the path to their solution and to direct dialogue between Palestinians and Israelis. The implementation of plans for the annexation will entail negative and even dangerous consequences for the entire Middle East region. It will directly affect the neighbors of Israel and Palestine, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan. It will affect the destiny of Palestinian refugees around the world. Given the significance of Jerusalem for the three world monotheistic religions, the entire Muslim Ummah, as well as millions of other believers, will be involved in the problem. Irreparable damage will be caused to the prospects of normalizing relations between regional states. Mr. President, enumerating problems that we encounter is not enough. It is necessary to anticipate, forestall, and solve them. Today, as never before, international cooperation and joint steps are required to advance the Middle East peace process. As an active member of the Quartet, Russia stands ready to make every effort to launch direct Palestinian-Israeli negotiations in the interests of achieving a settlement on an internationally recognized basis, UN resolutions, Madrid principles, the Arab Peace Initiative, which provides for the creation of an independent, sovereign, and territorially contiguous Palestinian state within the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. We are also ready for a dialogue in other formats with key regional players and for their involvement in the efforts of the Quartet. In this regard, we are in constant contact with Middle East countries and the League of Arab States. The task of restoring Palestinian unity on the PLO platform is extremely urgent. On our part, we continue contacts with Palestinian representatives and support the efforts of our Egyptian friends in this regard. Cessation of aggressive rhetoric, settlement activity in the occupied Palestinian territories, destruction of Palestinian property, armed clashes, and prevention of terrorist actions are important factors for creating an atmosphere of trust in the Palestinian-Israeli negotiations. On June 23rd, Jordan and Sweden hosted an international video conference in support of UNRWA. We are grateful to the organizers for their initiative. The number of participants and statements made once again confirmed the relevance of the agency and its stabilizing role. Mr. President, in conclusion, I would like to reiterate the need to abandon the annexation steps and launch the Palestinian-Israeli negotiation process as soon as possible in order to achieve a just and sustainable Middle East settlement and peace in the region. I thank you.
Je remercie le représentant de la Fédération de Russie pour sa déclaration et je donne à présent la parole au représentant du Niger.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Mr. President, the Middle East is the cradle of millenary civilization and the melting pot of civilized religions has for some decades been the scene of conflicts with unspeakable consequences. From Palestine to Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, and the Islamic Republic of Iran, there are countries and peoples exposed to violence, desolation, and despair, even though everything predestines them to peace, harmony, and prosperity. My delegation has followed with the attention required by this session today the presentation just made by the Secretary General, Mr. António Guterres, Mr. Nickolay, Mladenov, Special Coordinator, and Mr. Ahmed Abdul-Gate, Secretary General of the Arab League, all describing the situation prevailing in the Middle East. I thank them most sincerely. Mr. President, one briefing after another, our Council has pronounced itself on various aspects of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Since 1993, despite the Oslo Accord, Israel, the occupying power, has accelerated rather than halted its policy of building settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories, expropriating land and ignoring the legitimate Palestinian demand of a state, a demand that is also supported by the international community. In this regard, many peace processes and plans have been adopted by the international community in order to find a lasting solution to this protracted conflict. It is regrettable to say that the peace processes have merely been processes but without peace. Yet, benchmarks have been set, including by this Council, to pave the way of dialogue and peace. The occupation by force and the seizure of Palestinian land, which are contrary to international law, should end in accordance with the provisions of Resolution 2334. The Gaza Strip, the only territory spared is a blockade that has made it an inhabitable place, according to the United Nations itself. Israel's assertions of sovereignty over the whole of Jerusalem is also a violation of international law. It is also a war crime for an occupying power, Israel, to settle its own civilian population in an occupied zone. Mr. President, it cannot be said often enough, the settlement policy violates both the principle and the spirit of the peace accord. Another principle that should underpin the momentum for peace was set out in Resolution 1515, in which the Security Council, together with the international community, enshrines the two-state solution with Israel and Palestine living side by side in peace and security, in strict compliance with the 1967 borders as the basis for the settlement of this conflict. 27 years after the signing of the first peace agreement, the Palestinians sadly are no closer today to self-determination and the establishment of an independent state than they were yesterday. For instance, Palestinian youths of 27 years old today would have lived only under occupation, with its associated violence and deprivation of all kinds. She would only have experienced detention, disproportionate use of force, including against women and children. And yet, Mr. President, it is my country's conviction that both Israelis and Palestinians are people capable of overcoming this suffering that afflicts them and that distresses us. They have proved it by pooling their efforts in the face of a common enemy, the COVID-19, both in Gaza and in the West Bank. Israel, whose genius is known to all, must build peace by renouncing the annexation of parts of the occupied West Bank. Such action, is carried out, would constitute a serious violation of international law and a grave threat to international peace and security. In that regard, my country supports the Secretary General's call to all stakeholders, Israelis, Palestinians, states of the region, and the international community at large, to take immediate steps to allow the parties to step back and begin the process of re-engaging in a dialogue that will put an end to unilateral action, chart a positive course, and avoid falling into chaos. End of quote. Mr. President, I would like to conclude by saying that the time has come for us to put an end to this optical illusion, which has paved the way for the triumph of peace of the strongest, a peace of the victors. It is therefore high time to prevent the Council's paralysis on the Israeli-Palestinian question from causing the death by asphyxiation of the two-state solution, which we must save at all costs. I sincerely hope that through their statements, Mr. Riyad al-Maliki, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Palestine, and Mr. Danny Danon, Permanent Representative of Israel, will guide us on the road to reconciliation and peace between their two peoples. I thank you for your kind attention.
Je remercie le représentant du Niger pour sa déclaration et je vais maintenant faire une déclaration en ma qualité de représentant de la France. Je remercie le secrétaire général pour son introduction, ainsi que le secrétaire général de la Ligue arabe et le coordinateur spécial pour leur briefing. Je salue également la participation des ministres de Palestine, d'Afrique du Sud, d'Indonésie, de Saint-Vincent et les Grenadines, de Tunisie, du Vietnam et du Royaume-Uni. Nous sommes à un tournant dans l'histoire du conflit israélo-palestinien. Il y a près de 30 ans, les signataires des accords d'Oslo ont eu le courage de poser les premiers jalons de la résolution du conflit le plus ancien à l'agenda de ce Conseil. À une semaine de l'échéance du 1er juillet, l'espoir de parvenir à une paix globale au Proche-Orient n'a jamais paru aussi éloigné. La France se joint aux vives préoccupations exprimées par les membres de ce Conseil et le secrétaire général des Nations Unies, mais aussi par le haut représentant de l'Union européenne à plusieurs reprises face à la menace déclarée du gouvernement israélien de procéder à l'annexion de parties de la Cisjordanie à compter du 1er juillet. Celle-ci porterait tout d'abord une grave atteinte au droit international en violant de manière flagrante le principe de non-acquisition de territoire par la force inscrit dans la charte. Toute annexion de territoire en Cisjordanie, quel qu'en soit le périmètre, porterait également une atteinte irréversible au processus de paix ainsi qu'à la solution des deux États. Enfin, une telle décision fragiliserait plus encore la stabilité d'une région minée par les crises et la relation d'Israël avec ses voisins arabes. Nous devons donc nous mobiliser pour dissuader toute décision d'annexion qui ne serait ni dans l'intérêt des Palestiniens, ni dans celui des Israéliens. La France appelle le gouvernement israélien à s'abstenir de toute mesure unilatérale susceptible de conduire à l'annexion. La France ne reconnaîtra aucune modification des lignes de juin 1967, sauf celles agréées par les deux parties, conformément au droit international, aux résolutions de ce Conseil et aux paramètres sur lesquels repose la solution des deux États. Comme l'a dit le ministre Le Drian, compte tenu de sa gravité, une décision d'annexion ne saurait rester sans réponse. En particulier, l'annexion ne serait pas sans conséquence sur les relations de l'Union européenne avec Israël. À défaut de pouvoir relancer immédiatement le processus de paix, notre responsabilité collective, et en premier lieu la responsabilité de ce Conseil, qui a défini et endossé les paramètres de résolution du conflit, est de préserver les conditions d'une négociation future et la possibilité d'un accord entre les parties. Le conflit israélo-palestinien ne se résoudra pas par des décisions unilatérales. La France, avec ses partenaires européens, continuera de promouvoir la voie de la négociation, et plus largement le multilatéralisme et la défense d'un ordre international fondé sur la règle de droit. Nous nous tenons prêts à prendre toute notre part dans la relance d'un processus politique ambitieux et la reprise de négociations crédibles fondées sur le droit international, les résolutions pertinentes de ce Conseil et les paramètres internationalement agréés. Ces paramètres sont clairs et bien connus. 2 États vivant en paix et en sécurité le long de frontières sûres et reconnues, avec Jérusalem comme capitale des 2 États. Une annexion, quel qu'en soit le périmètre, serait un pas sans doute irréversible dans la direction inverse, celle de l'État unique qui mettrait un terme aux aspirations nationales des Palestiniens et au projet démocratique israélien. Nous devons collectivement mettre en garde contre ces perspectives et réaffirmer notre disposition à accompagner les parties sur la voie des 2 États, qui est la seule susceptible de conduire à une paix juste et durable dans la région. I thank the Secretary General for his introduction, as well as the Secretary General of the Arab League and the Special Coordinator for their briefings. I also welcome the participation of the Ministers of Palestine, South Africa, Indonesia, St. Vincent and Grenadines, Tunisia, Vietnam and the UK. We are at a turning point in the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Almost 30 years ago, the signatories of the Oslo agreements had the courage to take the first steps towards resolving the oldest conflict on the agenda of this Council. With 1 week to go before the deadline of the 1st of July, the hope of achieving a comprehensive peace in the Middle East has never seemed so remote. France shares the deep concerns expressed by the members of this Council and the Secretary General of the United Nations, but also by the High Representative of the European Union on several occasions regarding the Israeli government's declared threat to annex parts of the West Bank after the 1st of July. It would be a serious breach of international law, in flagrant violation of the principle of non-acquisition of territory by force enshrined in the Charter. Any annexation of territory in the West Bank, regardless of its perimeter, would also irreversibly undermine the peace process and a two-state solution. Finally, such a decision would further undermine the stability of a region undermined by crisis and Israel's relationship with its Arab neighbors. Our mobilization is therefore essential to prevent any annexation decision which would be in the interest of neither the Palestinians nor the Israelis. France calls on the Israeli government to refrain from any unilateral measures that could lead to annexation. France will not recognize any modification of the June 1967 lines, except those agreed by the 2 parties in accordance with international law, the resolutions of this Council, and the parameters on which the two-state solution is based. As Minister Le Drian said, because of its gravity, a decision on annexation cannot go unanswered. In particular, annexation will not be without consequences for the European Union's relations with Israel. Unless we are able to relaunch a peace process immediately, our collective responsibility is to preserve the conditions for the future negotiations and the possibility of an agreement between the parties. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict will not be resolved through unilateral decisions. France, together with its European partners, will continue to promote the path of negotiations and, more broadly, multilateralism and the defense of an international rule-based order. We stand ready to play our full part in relaunching an ambitious political process and resume credible negotiations based on international law, the relevant resolution of this Council, and internationally agreed parameters. Those parameters are clear and well known. 2 states living side by side in peace and security along secure and recognized borders, with Jerusalem at the capital of both states. An annexation, regardless of its perimeter, would undoubtedly be an irreversible step in the opposite direction, that of a single state which would put an end to national aspiration of the Palestinians and to the Israeli democratic project. We must collectively warn against this prospect and reaffirm our readiness to accompany the parties on a two-state path, which is the only one likely to lead to a just and lasting peace in the region. Thank you. Je reprends mes fonctions de président du Conseil et je donne à présent la parole à son Excellence Monsieur Riyad Al-Malki, ministre des Affaires étrangères de l'État observateur de Palestine.
Mr. President, Excellencies, members of the Council, we often use the image of a crossroad, as we did today, to explain how significant a moment in history is. It means your next decisions and actions will determine the course of history and the fate of nations. There is no doubt this is such a moment. For now, unfortunately, the driver is Israel, and seems it will not stop at the crossroad to assess the implications of its choices, because it is drunk on power, propelled by infinite impunity, motivated by one single thought that it has been under the influence of for decades: grabbing maximum Palestinian land with minimum Palestinians. Israel is under the illusion that this is the destination, and once it reaches it, it will be able to enjoy the view. It ignores that the road cannot end there and continues downhill towards an escalation of the conflict due to an oppressive regime combining colonialism and apartheid. It does not care that humanity has been down this road before, and that former colonial powers and liberation movements alike have all reached the same conclusion. Such a regime cannot prevail and will only lead to more injustice, instability, and insecurity. As many times before, Israel seems determined to ignore that big red stop sign the international community erected to save lives. Israel thinks, as has been its experience so far, that it will not be fined or arrested. It believes that Security Council resolutions are binding for others. International courts have jurisdictions over others. Sanctions are for others. Israel judges but cannot be judged. The only true bias towards Israel is the one shielding it from accountability and emboldening it by considering its illegal actions as so-called realities that need to be endorsed rather than reversed. Israel is testing the resolve of the international community, thinking its colonial appetite will prevail over the collective international will to advance regional peace and security and to preserve the rule-based multilateral order. We must prove it wrong. The international community remains committed to the rule of international law and to the international consensus on a just solution for the Palestine question. It opposes annexation in no uncertain terms, as reaffirmed in recent weeks by statements made from capitals from every corner of the globe. The global position also remains unwavering on the illegality of Israel's policy, including settlements. This wide international front, reflected in the gathering in the Jordan Valley just 2 days ago, with broad Palestinian and international mobilization, in the UNRWA ministerial meeting held yesterday, and in this high-level Security Council meeting, is strong and remains our best hope. Mr. President, members of the Council, Israel needs to know that annexation will have immediate and tangible repercussions. That is why we have called on the international community to adopt effective measures, including sanctions, to deter annexation and all other unlawful policies that have prepared the ground for it. It must also be made clear that annexation will irreversibly impact Israel's relations with Palestine and the region. The Oslo Accords were supposed to transform us into peace partners, but regrettably, Israel continued waging a war against Palestinian lives and Palestinian rights. It has violated the spirit and letter of the agreements, and with annexation is taking a decision that will defeat their very purpose. These accords were supposed to pave the way for an end of occupation and a final peace agreement. They cannot survive annexation. As we celebrate the 75th anniversary of the UN Charter, let us honor the UN purposes and principles: respect for the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples, respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms for all without distinction, the suppression of acts of aggression, and the prohibition of the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. Annexation, whether partial or total, gradual or immediate, is the ultimate breach of the UN Charter and cannot go unchallenged. From a legal perspective, annexation is not only unlawful, it is a crime under the Rome Statute. From a political perspective, it will ruin the chances for Israeli, Palestinian, and regional peace. From a security perspective, it is utter nonsense, as it replaces internationally recognized borders that can be defended with a system of military control and subjugation that only fuels conflict and violence. It is, as stated in the Secretary General's report, calamitous for Palestinians, Israelis, and region. The only explanation for it is an extremist ideology rooted in denial of the Palestinian right to this land, disregard for international law, and negation of history. It is this ideology that has undermined negotiations time and time again, with Israel using negotiations as cover for its continued colonization. This ideology fostered a narrative that Palestinians should be grateful that Israel was ready to give them back any part of their own land, fragmented and besieged enclaves. Kanto stands that Palestinians may even be allowed to call a state of their own. Genuine negotiations must aim at ending occupation to achieve peace, not at perpetuating occupation and calling it peace. We, the Palestinians, remain committed to peace. We have presented our position in writing on all final status issues to the Quartet. We have never retracted any proposal we have made to find a compromise. Unlike Israel, which says we must renegotiate all over again with each new government in Israel. We have accepted the long-standing terms of reference and international law as the basis for negotiations, while Israel has rejected and violated them. We accepted the pre-1967 borders, agreeing to an historic compromise encompassing only 22% of historic Palestine. And yet, Israel has spared no effort to undermine these borders. The entire world recognizes the significance of the Arab Peace Initiative and the promise it holds for our region. Where is the Israeli Peace Initiative? Even with the US plan, Israel said it is ready to grab immediately whatever parts of our land the plan unlawfully grants it, while expressing readiness to negotiate the rest indefinitely. This is why we call for an international peace conference and the multilateral mechanism that will help advance peace by holding the parties accountable, ensuring negotiations are neither a smokescreen nor a time-wasting exercise, while Israel finalizes its colonial plans, but rather that negotiations are the path to just and lasting peace. While Israel spares no effort to erase the pre-1967 borders, the Green Line, the world must consolidate them, including by recognizing the state of Palestine and by making any unilateral encroachment over the Green Line a red line. Every state has the power to help us change course before it is too late. The power to help end the Israeli occupation and salvage the two-state solution. The power to save lives. The power to preserve our global order. In fact, they have a legal and moral obligation to use this power through non-recognition and non-assistance to illegal actions, distinction and accountability. Upholding their obligations is the only path to ensure Israel abides by its own. At the end, allow me, Mr. President, to thank you for convening this important meeting. I also wish to express our appreciation to the Secretary General for his report and relentless efforts and those of his envoy to advance peace. If Security Council resolutions, including 2334, were implemented, peace would be a reality tomorrow, even today. Allow me also to seize this opportunity to thank the Secretary General of the Arab League and the ministers for their participation today as a clear signal of the urgency and gravity of the matter. I also wish to thank your country and council members, past, present, and incoming, for their consistent, principled stances, including against annexation. Allow me finally to thank the countries and the groups, including the Arab group, which has been fully mobilized in the lead up to this meeting, the OIC, NAM, the EU, that continue working to advance freedom, justice, and peace, conscious of how this could transform our region and the world. Mr. President, the Secretary General in his report highlighted the urgency of reversing this dangerous trajectory we are on. We are at a crossroad, and to reverse course before it is too late, the international community must take hold of the steering wheel. Thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie Son Excellence, Monsieur Al-Maliki, de cette déclaration et je donne maintenant la parole au représentant d'Israël.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Since the beginning of the conflict, the Palestinians have chosen rejectionism over realism. They reject the idea of a Jewish state. They do not want a Palestinian state beside a Jewish state, but at the expense of a Jewish state. They rejected the UN partition plan in 1947 and have rejected every Israeli offer for peace since. In recent decades, they have come to even reject every offer of negotiations. Instead of working towards peace, they have promoted rejectionism and the glorification of terrorism. Mr. President, the decision we face today is between realism and rejectionism. The reality is that Israel wants peace and security. The Palestinians, unfortunately, time and again, choose rejectionism over any realistic solution. There are currently significant regional opportunities, most notably President Trump's peace initiative. It is an important milestone for the region, and it represents a significant opportunity. As Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has stated during his White House visit in January this year, Israel has agreed to negotiate peace with the Palestinians on the basis of this peace plan. Israel will pursue this plan responsibly and in full cooperation with the United States while maintaining Israel's peace agreements and strategic interests. We expect the international community to make it clear to the Palestinians that their refusal to engage will not advance Palestinian interests. Mr. President, as the decades have gone by, reality has changed. Solutions that may have been relevant many years ago are no longer realistic, but the Palestinian leadership refuses to accept the consequences of their rejectionism. They have built a false narrative of the conflict and continue to fight for the unrealistic solutions that do not include a Jewish state. Unfortunately, the Palestinian leadership is encouraged to do so by some in the international community who have chosen to reward the Palestinians' rejectionism and ignore reality. They have adopted the Palestinian narrative and believe that tried and failed solutions from years ago are somehow still relevant. The truth is that even decades later, some in the international community are still unwilling to admit that the Palestinians were never really interested in a genuine, practical solution to the conflict. Instead of confronting the Palestinian leadership, they have tried to appease them by buying every rotten bill of goods the Palestinians were selling. This approach of blindly accepting the Palestinian narrative and demands has not and will not lead to a lasting and sustainable end to the conflict. Mr. President, there is a strong and undeniable connection between the Jewish people and their historic homeland of Judea and Samaria. This has been true for over 3 millennia, and no Palestinian propaganda can change that. Through official statements and policies, as well as educational textbooks, the PA tries to erase the Jewish people's ancient claim to the land of Israel. They wrongfully try to paint Jews as European colonists that must be expelled. Many in the international community have adopted this false narrative, which stands in complete contradiction to history and international law. We will speak about international law in a minute. Should Israel decide to extend its sovereignty, it will be doing so with respect to areas over which it has always maintained a legitimate historical and legal claim. Mr. President, the Bible is a cornerstone of the religions of the estimated 14 million Jews, 1.9 billion Muslims, and 2.3 billion Christians around the world. So let's go back to the Bible. In the Bible, God said to Abraham, and I quote Genesis 13:15, כי את כל הארץ אשר אתה רואה לך אתננה ולזרעך עד עולם. For all the land which you see, I give to you and your descendants forever. After being promised all of the land, Abraham chose to build a home in Hebron, in the heart of Judea. Mr. President, the Jewish claim to the land of Israel is also rooted in history. Ever since Moses led the people of Israel out of Egypt through the Sinai desert and to the land of Israel, returning to the land that God had promised Abraham, Jews have believed and exercised sovereignty in the promised land. Even when the Romans destroyed the Second Temple in 70 CE and the Jews were exiled from their home, Jewish communities survived in Jerusalem and elsewhere in our homeland. Historic artifacts are scattered across our land and around the world, including right outside the Security Council chamber, attesting to the Jewish connection to the land. On the Arch of Titus in Rome, one can find the spoils of Jerusalem, an image of Roman soldiers carrying the spoils they took from the Holy Jewish Temple as they exiled Jews from their home. These artifacts are not 50 or 100 years old, but thousands of years old. So too, our history in the land of Israel. And throughout that time, in the diaspora, the Jewish people never once relinquished our claim to our homeland. The story of the Jews returning to the land of Israel in the late 19th century to join their brothers and sisters who had never left is not a story of foreign people colonizing a foreign land, but one of a native people reuniting in their ancient homeland. Mr. President, long before the founding of the Palestinian Authority and its propaganda machine, the international community recognized the rights of the Jewish people to their land. And I heard my colleague from Germany speaking about international law. In the 1917 Balfour Declaration, the British stated their objective of achieving, and I quote, the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. The national home included the entire land of Israel, including Judea and Samaria. During the San Remo Conference, which formed the basis for the League of Nations mandate system, the Allies adopted Britain's Balfour Declaration. In 1922, the League of Nations designated the land west of the Jordan River in its entirety to be the territory allotted to a Jewish homeland. In 1945, the UN Charter, its founding document, was signed. Article 80 of the Charter specifies, and I quote, "Nothing in this chapter shall be construed in or of itself to alter in any manner the rights whatsoever of any states or any peoples or the terms of existing international instruments to which members of the United Nations may respectively be parties." In other words, the League of Nations' recognition of the right of the Jewish people to a state in their homeland was embraced once again in one of the main sources of international law, the United Nations Charter. Mr. President, Those who oppose Israel's legal claims to this territory also wrongly mischaracterize any potential Israeli decision to extend its sovereignty to this territory as so-called annexation. These objections result from embracing a Palestinian false narrative rather than an assessment of the historical and legal facts. Let's be honest. Let's be clear. The PLO is not and never was a state and has never been the sovereign in this territory. Never. Prove me wrong on that. Mr. President, another objection we hear is that applying sovereignty will harm regional stability. We heard it a few minutes ago. We have heard these arguments many times before. In 1948, before Israel declared its independence, we were warned not to do so because the response would mean the end of the dream of a Jewish homeland. In 1967, after the Six-Day War and the liberation of Jerusalem, Israel was warned of the repercussions of extending sovereignty to the United City of Jerusalem. In 1981, despite opposition similar to what we hear today, Prime Minister Begin declared the application of Israeli law in the Golan Heights and assured Israel's ability to protect herself from many threats in the region. And even as recently, all of us, we were in the chamber in the Security Council in 2018, when the US moved its embassy to Jerusalem, we were warned of the danger it would pose to the stability of the region. Israel will continue to promote her important interests, which include a realistic and secure peace between Israel and all its neighbors, and not allow some in the international community to try and intimidate us with threats of violence. Mr. President, the final objection is one that we have heard today, that applying sovereignty will end any chance of negotiations. And I ask, what negotiations? Where are the negotiations? Instead of speaking with us directly, Minister Maliki is coming to the UN Security Council. Why we cannot meet in Ramallah or in Jerusalem? Israel has repeatedly invited the PA to the negotiating table. In the few times where they even replied to the invitation, it was only to reject it. President Abbas has refused every deal that has been offered to him. He even condemned President Trump's peace plan before it had been published. Blaming Israel for the lack of negotiations is not only wrong, it is destructive to peace. By blaming Israel, you actually arm President Abbas with the last in a long line of excuses not to come to the negotiating table. A solution can come only through direct negotiations between the parties. Mr. President, the discussion over the extension of Israeli sovereignty to certain areas in Judea and Samaria does not stand in the way of peace. What stands in the way of peace is Palestinian rejectionism and the encouragement that they get from some in the international community. It is time that the Palestinians realize that rejectionism is a losing strategy. It is time that the international community chooses realism over rejectionism. I thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie le représentant d'Israël pour sa déclaration. Nous voici arrivés au terme de cette séance. Je vous remercie.